Welcome to the programme. As many as 200 people are feared dead or injured after a NATO-led airstrike in southern Afghanistan. A coalition spokesman said the strike was targeted at a meeting of Taliban commanders. But local officials say a large number of civilians are among the casualties. The attack happened in the southern province of Helmand, a Taliban stronghold. Dan Nolan has this report.
The civilian victims of the airstrike were taken to hospitals in Kandahar and Lashkar Gah. Some of them were as young as 8.
Two of my brothers have been killed in this airstrike. This was a strike in a small market area. Due to this airstrike, around 200 people were killed and wounded. I brought one of my cousins to the hospital.
Victims at the hospital, witnesses from the scene and a member of parliament from Helmand province have all told Al Jazeera there were more than 200 mainly civilian casualties who'd gathered to witness a public execution. But local police say there were 150 Taliban casualties and 50 civilians. NATO acknowledges there was an airstrike conducted by coalition aircraft. They claimed the target was a meeting of senior Taliban commanders and dispute claims of civilian casualties. Taliban sources have told Al Jazeera that a number of their fighters were killed in the strike, but civilian casualties were much higher. This weekend, President Hamid Karzai travels to Camp David to meet with George Bush. Civilian casualties caused by foreign forces will be at the top of the agenda, but they'll also discuss the deteriorating security situation here as the South Korean hostage crisis drags on. Dan Nolan, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Libya is on the brink of signing an arms deal with France worth around $405 million. It comes just days after the French President Nicolas Sarkozy visited Tripoli. But the contract is creating problems for France's new president. He's been criticised by his political opponents at home, and the German foreign minister says he wasn't told about the deal, a breach of protocol among the European partners. Carl Stano Navarra has the details.
It seems the payoff keeps coming, and France is on the front line. Just days after the French President Nicolas Sarkozy flew to Tripoli following the release of 5 Bulgarian nurses and a Palestinian medic, a multi-million-dollar arms deal is close to being sealed between Libya and a subsidiary of the European defense giant EADS.
The contracts have not been formally signed. There is a letter of intent from Libya saying we wish to buy Milan missiles. There has already been an agreement by a ministerial commission in February 2007. And there is also a letter of intent for radio systems.
Paris strongly denies that the deal is connected to the release of the medics. France hailed their return from Libya as a diplomatic success. The president's wife, Cecilia Sarkozy, flew the three medics home. Last July 14th, France showcased its military technology. The contracts are worth an estimated $405 million, and the weapons will be built in France. The country is the biggest shareholder of the European arms manufacturer. They'll be supplying Milan anti-tank missiles and communications equipment. But the deal, the first since the lifting of an arms embargo on Libya 3 years ago, is raising eyebrows in Paris and beyond. The opposition leader, François Hollande, is calling for an inquiry. But Tripoli considers it another step towards its return to the international fold. Carl Stano Navarra, Al Jazeera.
Heavy monsoon rains and flooding have killed more than 170 people and forced around 19 million from their homes in South Asia. Waters are now slowly starting to recede in some of the worst-hit areas in northern India and Bangladesh. But there are fears of disease and questions are being raised about the relief measures taken. Imran Khan reports.
Local television channels show the desperate situation. You normally would have to walk this road, but now boat is the only way to travel. This sheet of water is continuing to make life in huge swathes of India and Bangladesh miserable. Millions have been affected, their homes just poking out of the water, and vital farmland has been destroyed. In Bangladesh, boats were commandeered and animals huddled in flooded farms. It's a massive crisis, and on both sides of the border, getting emergency food, fuel and medicine to them has proved nearly impossible. As the flood recedes with each passing day, the risk of disease becomes ever more real. and that will only add to the misery. India's capital, Delhi, spent most of Thursday underwater. And in its eastern state of Bihar, things are desperate. One minister making a plea for help.
Bihar should be declared flood-stricken area. The farmers should be spared of all their loans. No relief is provided. There is no government to manage here.
The government is listening and says it's doing its best.
There have been severe rains. Such conditions are there after such heavy rain. People are facing difficulties. The government is trying its best to fulfill its responsibilities.
And it is a huge responsibility. People here are just trying to survive and find a way out. India's antiquated railroad system is barely functioning, leaving many stranded on flooded ground. Imran Khan, Al-Jazeera.
India's national security advisor has called it an excellent deal. But the India-US civilian nuclear agreement has come in for heavy criticism from Pakistan as well as China. So let's take a look at some of the features of this deal, which was unveiled a few hours ago. Delhi now has the right to stockpile and reprocess nuclear fuel, a key step in making atomic weapons. Although the text does say the reprocessing has to take place at a site under UN inspection. While the US will ship nuclear fuel and technology to civilian reactors, India will have to open these for inspections. The military facilities, however, would remain off limits. And if the US were to cut the fuel supply for any reason, an Indian weapons test presumably among them, Washington would help find third-party countries to supply India's reactors. In other words, it's guaranteed. Well, it's concerned in Islamabad, in Pakistan, that this deal will lead to a nuclear arms race in South Asia. But Indian defence analyst Uday Bhaskar says that Pakistan's alarm is misplaced.
I think much of the Pakistani anxiety is something that would exist under any circumstances. And I think the July 2005 agreement is not going to in any way contribute to what has been described as either an arms race. I think this is going to allow the India-US bilateral relationship to reach its full potential. And I think the relationship between the United States and Pakistan has to be seen in a completely, what I would call as a different plane, given the fact that the United States and Pakistan have had a very close military relationship for almost 4 decades. So I think the Pakistani anxiety, perhaps, to my mind, is misplaced.
Uday Bhaskar speaking there from India. Now to a new push for an end to the violence in Sudan's Darfur region, this time from several rebel groups. They've gathered for talks in the Tanzanian city of Ashura, hoping to find common ground for a fresh round of peace talks with the Sudanese government. Their meeting comes just days after the UN agreed to send 26,000 peacekeepers to Darfur. Our African Bureau Chief Andrew Simmons says they have a huge task ahead of them if they're to reach a deal.
There will be no deal in these talks. However, these talks are very important simply because of the extra momentum caused by this agreement, this unanimous decision by the UN Security Council to send in an AU-UN hybrid force. However, there is a massive task ahead in getting these peace talks moving, in getting an agreement to get all the factions around the table. It's remarkably complex, but I'll try to give a quick analysis. Effectively, turn the clock back last year when the Darfur peace agreement was signed. It was signed in Abuja, Nigeria, by only one rebel group. Then throw another dozen rebel factions behind that who are non-signatories. They don't agree with each other, some of them are fighting with each other, and a remarkably complex situation develops. The people at these talks in Arusha don't include Abdel Wahid. He is from the Sudan Liberation Movement that broke away from Mini Minawi's faction, Mini Minawi now being part of the government. So that is a big block of rebel people who are against the move towards a peace deal when the issues haven't been addressed. The issues are remarkably complex as well. So the best hope of all is that there's some sort of roadmap agreed at these talks, and the talking will really get into some detail tomorrow and possibly on Sunday morning as well.
Andrew Simmons there, our Africa Bureau Chief. Well, it's been 4 months since Democratic Republic of Congo opposition leader Jean-Pierre Bemba fled his country for Portugal. He says he's determined to go back, but must have his safety guaranteed. But Bemba's opponents are threatening to charge him with treason over clashes between his forces and government troops.